Hey guys, it's Jim here with the Adventures of Ginger and Opus. On a weekend in October 2020, my friends Mark and Mona talked my wife Lori and I and our dog Maverick into running the Copper City Jeep Trail. I'm embarrassed to tell you that after living in Washington State my entire life, and I thought jeeping on every imaginable trail, I had seen them all, but the fact is that I had never heard of Copper City. It reminded me a lot of Colorado, and you'll see here that we were able to stop at some of the ruins. This is the old mill that was in operation from the late 1800s, early 1900s through about the beginning of World War II. And it really started reminding us all of Colorado. And I started making the comparison in my mind to Black Bear Pass. So, what is the kind of criteria? Like, I want to call this the Black Bear Pass of Washington at this point, where we're looking at the old mine ruins and thinking about how the trail's going to go. I kind of thought there's a couple of criteria for Black Bear. Number one is it's got to be historic. Again, a very historic trail, a lot of mining activity there, beautiful country. You got to have a narrow shelf road. It's got to be passable by most 4x4 vehicles. I think that's something that can't be overlooked. Simply because Black Bear is not super technically challenging, but there certainly is cause to be, I guess, aware of the consequences of making an error. And obviously, beautiful scenery has to come into play. And so we embarked on this trail, and we were having a great time. This is a place I hadn't been before. Again, not a super technically challenging trail, but as you will see, with some of the tight corners and switchbacks and off camber situations and tight squeezes, that there is definitely a high consequence for damage, and it actually becomes a shelf road, which is super exciting. It's not something that you see a lot in Washington. In Washington State, most of the trails will go straight up the side of a mountain. And that's just due to the topography of the Cascades. So as we kind of went along, we were kind of getting a sense that the trail was, pretty smooth, not very well used. It turns out to be an up and back trail rather than a downhill one way only like Black Bear is. But it really, really turned out to be sort of a beautiful drive for this first section. Now, one of the things that doesn't come across really well in the videos is that as we get into sort of the shelf road portion, the road gets rather steep. Oh, wait a second. Here's a part that I forgot to talk about. We actually had to do some trail clearing, which honestly in October is a little unusual. Normally our trail cleaning happens in the springtime, but the previous evening there had been one heck of a windstorm. So I think that these trees that we cleared just came down the night before, and the ground was relatively wet because there has been quite a bit of rain up here. One thing about this trail, and we'll talk about the location later, is that it is sort of towards the central part of the state. It's almost encroaching on the west side of Washington, that again gets quite a bit of moisture. But we had a combination of factors here when we were pulling these trees out of the way. This particular one, we were able to pivot and actually kind of help line the road. And then the other one that we did, and I don't think I got video of that one, we actually had to cut that one out with a chainsaw. I can't speak highly enough. It's not sponsored at all, but the DeWalt 12-inch 20-volt chainsaw is amazing. Anyway, another one of those criteria when you're thinking about trails like Black Bear, tight switchbacks. This is actually a reverse switchback over a bridge. Consequence for failure here is pretty bad on the right-hand side. On the left side, you'd fall into the creek and probably break the bridge. But when you're driving a JL, especially an Unlimited, it's like driving a bus through the forest. So you've got to take real care in making sure that you don't hit the sides or fall off a bridge or fall off the side of the mountain. Anyway, back to the talk about the shelf road. What you can't really see real well in the video is how steep the side hills were. There was one point where the butt puckerometer dealie in the JL said that we were at 26 degrees. And I think it was actually right here. And I've been four-wheeling for my entire life. I think my personal butt meter kind of comes into play in about 28 degrees. So we're pretty close to that sort of pucker factor that you get sometimes. But again, the electronic stabilizer effect on the camera doesn't actually do it justice. This is back to flat earth, but you can see definitely a shelf road at that point. And now we're kind of getting into this sort of fern forest. And this is really distinctly different than most of the forests in Colorado, which are quite a bit drier. And even the forests in eastern Washington are quite a bit drier. But now you've got ferns and Douglas firs and cedar trees. You got white cedars here, a few pine trees here and there, but mostly Douglas firs and spruce trees. Just absolutely beautiful country. I cannot recommend this trail enough, especially if you're more of a beginner. I will say this, take a friend and make sure that you go during an off-peak time, because this trail is in and out, so up and back, meaning that there's no loop and it's not one way. And there are parts that would be very, very challenging to back down or back up, depending on who you caught coming up the other way. Now, this is one of the craziest things. I think this is called a bomb cyclone or something like that in the forest. Anyway, a few years ago, a giant windstorm came through and just absolutely terrorized this section of the forest, ripping up giant old growth trees and breaking them off high up like they were toothpicks. It created some really interesting obstacles on the trail, but more than anything, just watching the scenery at this point, like coming around this corner, it's just like, oh my gosh, what happened here? It was really reminiscent of back in the early 80s when Mount St. Helens blew and it just knocked all the trees down like toothpicks. Just absolutely insane to watch how much devastation that these winds can cause in such a very short order. We're talking about right here is like, gosh, could you imagine having been up here when this happened? And if you were, what would you do? I mean, you can't hide behind a tree because that's what's fallen over. And I guess you would probably try to hide behind a fallen tree or a root ball or something, but it just would be the most scary thing in the world. And there's nothing that would have said that there weren't people up here, enjoying this trail on a day like that. So here's about the last tight squeeze that we had to get through. As you saw, the Mark's TJ, really narrow rig, regular Jeep width rig at 59, 60 inches at the body and 74 inches or something at the track width with his 35s. Really had no problem. We're a little tighter. I think we cleared on both sides by about an inch. So after we get through this squeeze, we actually end up at the top of the trail where there's a mine that we took a short hike to. It's less than a mile, probably 3/4 of a mile up to the summit there, and you can see the old rails for the old mine cars and where the mine entrance was and where the mine tailings piles and the sort of the bases for the equipment and all these things that were taken out. According to the signage, the equipment was all moved. All the big stuff was moved in the 40s to other active mining sites. So the guys that did this failed, and they spent $250,000 to get $20,000 in ore. So the verdict: is it beautiful? Yes. Is it a little sketchy in a couple of spots? Yeah, I think so. Is it equivalent to Black Bear Pass in Telluride, Colorado? Absolutely not. But the answer to is it worth visiting is an absolutely. We will go up there again and visit many times, only being 2.5 to 3 hours away from the house and only maybe 45 minutes from camp on gravel roads. It's an absolutely spectacular way to spend an October afternoon, and we look forward to coming back. Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. We definitely appreciate your time. And again, your liking and subscribing to these videos certainly helps us continue to make more content. Until then, we'll see you on the trail.